She includes the voices of housewives, artists, party workers, students, soldiers, traders, living through times of political upheaval. So she covers the period after the fall of the Soviet Union and the decades that followed it. And she calls these polyphonic narratives. I'm not going to quote much, but one vital quotation is, she says, I don't ask people about socialism, about the ideology of socialism, about the politics of the period. I want to know about love, about jealousy, about childhood, about old age. I want to know about the music, the dances, the hairdos, the heartbreak, the myriad details. Because when I'm writing, I'm piecing together what is called domestic or interior history. As history passes through a person's soul. And I've always been drawn to this miniature stage, this miniature expanse. One person, one individual, and this is where everything really happens. After all, history does not happen to robots, history happens to human beings. We are all individuals in the mass, and our experience of history, the entire feeling of history is what literature is all about. Speaking for myself, the great transformative moments of world history have always come to me as paragraphs out of literature. I said I would not use the names of books which nobody has read. Rather, I would reduce it to books which everybody has read. Something which we have known and we can relate to. I'll speak about three important, heart-beating scenes out of the Tale of Two Cities. I cannot separate the French Revolution from the Tale of Two Cities. You know, Danton, Robespierre, Marat, and Defarge. You know, it doesn't stop with Robespierre, because for me, Madame Defarge is very much part of the landscape of the French Revolution. And there are episodes which come to me heart-throbbingly. One is knives being sharpened, ready for the killing of the innocents, the September killings. Another is very refined captive aristocrats meeting new captives, rising from their chairs and welcoming the new inmates very gently. It has a whole story behind it. So, the essence of a great epoch in world history is accessible to my heart, my living experience through literature. I'll go on to another book, which most of us have read, Dr. Shivago, and my students will be familiar with something I'm going to say. The Soviet Union has been formed, the provisional government has been deposed, of course the Tsar is a prisoner, and our protagonist experiences this great moment of history in an individual way. There is street fighting on the streets of Moscow. His child is ill. There is no milk in the house. And he leaves his home desperately in search of a bottle of milk and soda for the feverish child. And as he is passing, a blizzard begins. The snow descends on all sides. There is a cone of light from a lamppost, and a newsboy passes, shouting, well, hot from the press, breaking news. And he quickly buys a paper from him, and he freezes, because here is the declaration that the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics has been formed. And he says at that moment he stood stock still. And he said centuries from now the world will read about this moment. But here I am in the middle of this moment, living it. There are other realities about all revolutions, all civil wars, which come to me through literature. For example, immediately after the declaration of a classless society, what is the first action which our protagonist has to resort to? he has to go out and steal a log of wood. Now that action says so much in that brief paragraph that volumes cannot summarize the motive behind it, the entire social reshuffle that took place. Small things carry entire historical stories. For example, there is a new metallic stove. The old porcelain stoves are no longer practical because they consume too much fuel, and the old villas have been given to the proletariat. So now a new contraption is built which does not work. It fills the rooms up with smoke, and when it breaks down, the protagonist calls a mechanic. The mechanic doesn't know how to put it right. Instead, the mechanic turns out to be not a mechanic, but a former philosopher, a former professor of philosophy. So rather than repair the stove, they sit together discussing ethics and aesthetics, and he's an expert on Benedetto Croce. The stove will not work. This stove is the new governmental experiment. The old stove is outmoded, or the old forms are gone, but there is nothing satisfactory which will work. What will function? Now, what a powerful idea to be expressed through a single literary allegory. And finally, the most pungent of all, when the entire economic collapse had happened in Russia, barter was the only form of trade, and Tonia, Yuri Trivago's wife, has no fuel, has no food. They begin selling their things. So she has a beautiful ornamental wooden cabinet which she can't bring herself to smash up for the fire. So she goes out and she brings a peasant. And that peasant lights that little cabinet, and he brings her a cartload of wood. She's quite unhappy at losing this beautiful piece of furniture, and as the peasant casts his eyes around the room, suddenly he catches sight of a piano, and he says, "What will you take for that? Next time, I'll get you a sack of potatoes." And she has to agree. Now, how much has been said? Because the proletariat did not want a classless society. They wanted to be as the upper classes were. The peasant did not know how to play a piano. He had no use for it, but it was a symbol of something that generations of his kind had coveted. So, I just bring you, I don't know whether my time is coming to an end, but these are the little details. You know, the micro-vision that I spoke of, the interiority of the historical experience. All of us inhabit our time. And we can inhabit the experiences of other people, because after all, what is the purpose of all this discourse? The purpose is to know how human beings feel. After all, it would be a sorry world if we were entirely out of sync with other people. All the people whom we other in all our societies. It is by entering into the experience of the others that some kind of positivity can be created in a society. How much time more do I have? Oh, I can go on. I would also like to sound a note of caution. We are also familiar with the phenomenon of fake news. And propaganda is one of the subjects covered under this conference. There have been famous cases in which a crypto-history or a pseudo-history is deliberately created. And this is, again, my students are familiar. We used to speak about Gone with the Wind and the entire story behind it. Because Gone with the Wind, which glorifies a vanished way of life, a dignity, grace, benign slave owners, happy slaves, you know, a certain nobility of the southern states of America, this was entirely a fabricated narrative. There was a movement called the United Daughters of the Confederacy, founded in 1894, and they applied themselves very consciously to creating literature around called the lost cause. The lost cause was the downfall of the Deep South. They were committed to glorifying monuments, they were committed to glorifying relics of the Ku Klux Klan, and to propagate the myth of the paternalistic, solicitous slave owner, and the family connections between the slaves and the masters. And this was addressed with such efficiency that an entire literature came about. Now, when we think of the American Civil War, we think of, what do we see? Lee's armies on the back foot. We see Scarlett O'Hara starving. We see her hiding under a bridge as the Yankee army marches over the bridge. We see Atlanta in flames. But we must also know that a lot of this was part of a political agenda. So what I have been saying applies 90% of the time, but 10% it is always often a part of a very, very deliberate political agenda. And it is up to the discerning reader and the historian to discriminate between the two. That will be all. Thank you very much.
I don't have to comment on what Professor Gour has explained to us, but then what she tells us about fake history is in a way a continuation of what Professor Baran in his keynote speech yesterday, mentioned. He did mention something about political agenda playing a role in the creation of history, but then Professor Gour doesn't mince words, and she, straightforwardly calls it fake history, which it is. Another interesting point she makes here is about macro and micro visions of history, and she's so perceptively makes this point that literature does bring to us the macro vision of history, and in a way the two examples she took up, one from the Tale of Two Cities in Dr. Zhivago, how these works are not histories of royal genealogies, of conquests, etc. But they are the histories of the people who should matter, must matter. Thank you, Professor Gour. There is a book by Anne Cathoy's titled, Is History Fiction? So in the introduction of the book, on page number 3, page 3 is a problematic term, but then it is there on page 3 of the introduction in the book, Anne Cathoy asks a series of probing questions. I'll read out that series to you, and listen to this series of questions that she raises in this book. Can historians tell the truth about the past? Should history be written for the present or for its own sake? Is it possible to see the past in its own terms? Should we make moral judgments about people and actions in the past? It's a very loaded question. Are histories shaped by narrative conventions so that their meaning derives from their form rather than the past itself? If we start answering these questions, we'll be needing 7 days, not just one session. So, I leave these questions to you, with you, to think about and cudgel your brains with. But then, the last question here throws up the crucial word, the neutral and incorporative word, narrative. And that is a word which gives us our clue to what Professor Farooqi has to speak on and about. she intends to look into some non-literary narratives from the Indian continent. Very interesting histories she's going to tell us about.
Begins by thanking the Department of English of the University of Allahabad for having thought of me and asking me to participate in this panel discussion. As I have been a student of this university and have, carried this label along with me all my life when I taught at Jamia, Millia, Islamia, Department of English, and defended the university and stood up for it all my life, and I'm really delighted to be here today. I did come here for some vivas, PhD vivas, for which my professor, not my professor, but they are my DDs, they called me a couple of times, more than a couple of times, but I am really elated to be here today. So thank you, Dr. Vivedi and the entire department. So let me begin by saying that in the recent past we have been witness to a number of so-called narratives, or they can be called maybe histories, which are written like narratives or even biographies, which have kind of given us an opportunity to know the people who kind of created history or who were responsible for creating certain circumstances or events or giving rise to events, but they were not in the limelight as such, and even those who were in the limelight. We've got a more nuanced picture of them through this kind of writing. And it's almost like, the authors have allowed us to walk in the footsteps of those who were creating history at that time, or who were in a position to create history, we may say, because as we all understand that history is created by very fluid circumstances, and history is closely akin to literature in the sense that history tells us what happened while literature tells us what might have happened. So now when we carry out a fusion of history with literature, we see that, by literature I mean the non-fiction prose or the narrative form, we are given the hows and whys of history. So in a way, what might have happened and what actually happened is given a reason. It's given some kind of at least a narrative around it where we can see what could have been the diverse and various and multiple circumstances and traditions and customs which might have led to certain events taking place in history. So, so I remember that when I was starting out with my PhD, and which was on the 19th century criticism of Shakespeare, my father told me that one thing that you have to do if you want to write a good thesis is to make friends with all these people whom you're going to write about. So, he told me a couple of anecdotes about how talkative Coleridge was, and how, if he would catch hold, if he wanted to, once, one of his contemporaries, I forget the name, he met them on the street, and he would catch that person's collar and then go on talking for hours. So that picture kind of never left me, and so he told me that, you have to talk to them every day, you have to know them like real people, and then only you can attempt a kind of an analysis of the 19th century criticism of Shakespeare, which was in a way revolutionary, and it reinstated Shakespeare as the be-all and end-all of in English drama. So I'm strongly reminded of what he said, because I didn't quite understand what he meant by that. But gradually, as I became more familiar, I read more and more, I realized that biographies also can be either very, kind of technical and matter of fact, or they can be nuanced and they can have some kind of empathy and compassion in them, and also acknowledge that the biographies that are being written are of human beings, and human beings can be frail, they have their flaws, they have their frailties, they are humorous, they are compassionate, they can be angry. So as recently I was reading a kind of an obituary that Namita Gokhale has written about her son-in-law Patrick French, who passed away last week. And she says that, she wants to, I really like the way she describes him as a biographer. She says that he's a biographer and historian at the same time. And he gives us a history of people, not events. And his writing displays an empathy as well as erudition. So in that sense, Patrick French has written a history of, modern India coming into existence, with the time when the British were deciding to withdraw and India was about to gain independence. His version of the entire thing is far more empathetic than any history that we might have read in our schools and colleges. So this, kind of struck a chord with me, because I have been thinking a lot about, books written by I can't call them historians, like authors like Ira Mukhoti and Parvati Sharma. And Parvati Sharma, I remember she says somewhere in her introduction or wherever, that, she's a novelist originally, and then she suddenly decides to write a book on Jahangir. So she says that, how does a novelist write about, facts? So, and then, in order to quote her, I wrote it down. She says, having spent much of my life trying to learn the art of fiction, how now to tell a story that is a fact? So I really found that interesting, that, and then she says that, and so this story, which was to be factual in a way, so she says that it had to be accurate as well as engaging. And so here is a novelist writing a history of we can say, a slightly mysterious figure, Jahangir, who had this very powerful consort, Noor Jahan, who was so powerful at one point of time in the Mughal Empire that she actually had coins, minted with her image and with her name. So she says that, that what is the difference between a technical history book and a narrative, and Parvati tells us that, say a narrative begins with that this happened and this happened and then this happened, until you build up a world. And if you're lucky, that world is truthful. So it's like, it's like a story which is truthful. And of course, we have this age-old understanding in this part of the world, the Indian subcontinent, that all stories are true. So, so in that case, it becomes a very interesting, kind of combination of truth, which is written in an engaging and interesting manner, and it is giving rise to a whole world. So this is. Parvati has got a lot of praise for having having recalled an India which was religiously tolerant and reasonably open and pluralistic, and the important role of women in governance during Mughal times is especially brought into focus by Parvati Sharma, and the reader is, pleasantly surprised to see what was going on inside the harem, unlike the kind of impression that the British had chosen to give about the harem as a debauched and lecherous place. And while the harem was a very orderly place where there were women of all kinds, there were sisters, there were widows of kings, there were friends, women of friends or noblemen who who no longer had, a family or a husband, and of course there were wives and daughters. So and also, like as Ira tells us that whenever there is a mention of the emperor having gone into the zanana, it's not supposed to be a mention saying, in the sense that he's gone there to have sex with a dozen wives. It's a place where he is safe, where he knows that, nobody is going to come and interrupt him with some kind of good or bad news, or where he will not be attacked most of the times. And he can, so therefore it used to be a place where, where all the political discussions and the debates and what you call it, mind, jogging of the mind would be done, because when the king would retire into the not retire but visit the zanana, often the important pieces of information which he would want to discuss with his higher level ministers would be told to him at that time, and mind you, the women would be privy to all that. And the women would be, in many cases, like that, for instance, the example of Hamida Banu Begum, she was Akbar's mother, or the case of Harka Bai, who is, by some strange reason, whose name has gone down with readers as Jodha Bai, and so she would be around, or there would be the nurse mothers, would be present, and there would be all the sisters, for instance, you have Humayun's sister Gulbadan Begum, a very influential woman, but you never went into questioning how Gulbadan Begum could be so educated and so well trained in the art of writing and in history that she was actually commissioned to write the Humayun Nama by her half-brother Humayun. So you can imagine the kind of learning that these women had, and how they were therefore instrumental in creating the ambience of the empire, and how they were instrumental in we can say, supporting or not supporting a particular prince, or for ascending to the kingdom. For instance, we know that Aurangzeb had his brother Dara Shikoh killed, and since Dara Shikoh was strongly supported by his sister Jahan Begum, she was greatly annoyed with him, and he actually castigated her, and he kept her within the confines of the palace, because he kind of imprisoned her for some years. So you understand that her support must have been so important that it was very necessary to curb the women in the empire, in the dynasty, from exerting their influence beyond a point, because we often see that the Mughal Empire was an empire where the war of ascension was something which was generally, one was expected to contend with one's own brothers, but it was not expected all the time that there would be murder. But then once in a while, some odd king would also, could also get his brothers killed, like Aurangzeb did, or blinded. So, what I'm trying to say here is that we have to understand how and why these events came about. And Ira Mukhoti has been instrumental, in her book called The Daughters of the Sun, and then another book called Heroines. And she has given us in great detail the lives of certain very important women in the Mughal dynasty. And she begins with telling us that, Babur, when he was coming to India, they were still, they would trace their ancestry to the Timurids, who were, as we know, nomadic, and they were not the kind of clan, the race that would settle in one place. But it's only with Babur that a change kind of comes about, and Babur tries to stabilize himself in the Hindustan of that time. And there was a time when he lost Afghanistan, and those, I'm not very accurate with my geography or with the dates, but at one point of time it so happened that he had to marry his very dear sister to his enemy in order to be able to escape from the siege to which he had been put. And so I think the name of that sister was, I'll just see if I've written it down. No, I don't have the name. I think it was Kha Zamani Begum or something. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the exact name. And it's very interesting to see how each and every woman was given titles. And they had their entire identity, and they had several names. And when they would actually reach a position of power, say for instance when Mumtaz Mahal died, when she was giving birth to her 14th child, Jahan Ara Begum was the eldest daughter, and she was 17 years old at that time. But since there was no other woman who could replace her, because Mumtaz Mahal was so beloved of Shah Jahan that he could not imagine that any other woman amongst his wives could take her place, that Jahara Begum was made we could say that she was the master of affairs in that sense, and she was immediately given the title of Badshah Begum. So Badshah Begum or Begum Sahiba, though she was just 17, and it turns out that she never married. And though she never married, she was never ever looked down upon for that, and she continued to, she was, as Ira Mukhoti tells us, that India at that point of time under Shah Jahan was the wealthiest region of the world. The per capita income of the Mughal, of citizens of the Mughal Empire was about 100-fold than that of an average British. And when the British arrived in the Mughal court, they were so overawed that it took them a long time to understand what was going on, and they would write back to their homelands with such awe about the kind of wealth and opulence that the dynasty had. So here what I was trying to say was that Jahara Begum inherited 50% of Mumtaz Mahal's wealth, and then she increased her wealth so much that that she ultimately became the most powerful and the richest woman in the world. And at that point of time, her wealth has been estimated as over 1 crore of rupees at that point of time. So we can imagine how the likes of historians, or we can say, though Ira Mukhoti of course studied natural sciences at Cambridge, and in one of her interviews she says that though I am a scientist and I've studied natural science, I feel that my training as a natural scientist has helped me to write what I have written about these women. And she says that she was also kind of provoked into writing about the women of India. It could be a Meera or a Razia Sultan or a Rani Lakshmi Bai, or the women of the Mughal Empire, because there were many of them and who continued, over a period of about 200 years. That, the famous Nirbhaya rape case, outside a cinema hall, and several other such cases she has cited, saying that when this can still happen to girls, to a girl or a woman in India, in Delhi, then we really need to look at, are we more powerful today, or were the women of those times better off? And so how much time have I taken? No, I mean, is my time over? Because I'm very passionate about this subject, so I'll just go on and... Yeah, I can wind up in 2 more minutes. So, what I was saying was that, these women, they were not objects of, they were not just sex symbols, or they were not, I mean, none of these women. For that matter, she mentions Rani Lakshmi Bai in her other book, Heroines, and she says that Rani Lakshmi Bai's image has been, she has been completely, kind of disempowered by projecting her merely as a widow and a mother. So what happens is that, you keep on talking about her as a mother or as a widow, because she went unaccompanied into the battlefield, and she fought bravely. She spent nights alone in the jungle, finally to disappear into legend, because we don't really know how she died or when she died. But here is this brave woman who must have had a dazzling personality and identity of her own, and intelligence, where she could think, she could decide what she wants to do. Or even Begum Hazrat Meher, who was actually a courtesan earlier, but that is never mentioned easily, unless you go into great detail. Then only you get to know that she was a courtesan, or she was of black origin, she was dark, and maybe her features were not so Indian kinds. But then she was so very talented at singing and dancing that she was given the designation of Pari, Nawab Wajid Ali Shah had these Paris. So all I'm saying, finally, just to wind up, is that, that these women, they are in a way, if there is any word for, feminine word for emasculated, in the sense that, they have been just restricted to certain categories. And that is all the time that they are fighting for the nation, or they are fighting the war of freedom, 1857, blah blah. But there is no recognition of the region they come from, or what were their particular circumstances, and for how long did they last, and what prompted them to go into the battlefield alone, or Razia Sultan, for that matter. Immediately if you make a film about them, or you write a fictional book, you will, most of the movie will go into her amorous encounter with that black slave. But that is not the only aspect to her. In fact, that aspect shows how much she was in control of her destiny, how she could choose. So these are the small little points that I'm trying to say, that these are history and literature. They get intertwined, and they give rise to story which is different, which is a different kind of story, which is accurate, but it is a literary thing at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Farooqi. It has turned into a beautiful plenary speech, in fact. Hidden histories, or brushed under the carpet histories in the harems or harems, whichever pronunciation you prefer. And certainly those harems were the extensions of the political space of the court, and so many imperial royal decisions actually materialized there. They happened there in the harems. And probably the courts were the places where they were just embossed with some kind of seal. And very interesting and meaningful insight by reference to these two sources that Professor Farooqi has mentioned. And also this interesting wedding connection, marriage of technical history and narrative that I think most of us would have loved it. A narrative begins. We are so familiar with our style of story writing, and we say, once upon a time, this happened, and then this happened. This is how a narrative begins, and then, as Professor Farooqi says, if it turns out to be truthful, it becomes history. Otherwise, it becomes a story. Very interesting. And then, yes, of course, biographies are also that genre are those places where histories remain buried or hidden to be discovered. Thank you very much, Professor Farooqi. There is a word in our contemporary politically charged atmosphere, and the word we frequently encounter, and this word has earned an international notoriety or international reputation, and the word is woke. Yesterday also this word was used somewhere off stage. So the word began in a very sensible, meaningful manner, and it only meant awakening against racism. That was the meaning of the word originally, but in our recent years it has turned into a term that denotes an extremist ideology. So this word has an interesting history of this development. Professor Prakash Sinha intends to deal with the original, the less politically charged sense of the word, and he intends to speak on the latest trends in wokeism, and he has a subtitle for his brief talk, which is Critical Race Theory. Professor Sinha.
Well, I found myself arrested by personalities as a historian, and historian of the period when the Stone Age was here. So at that time there was no literature, no script, only sketches, only graphic arts. But when the question arises, what is history? To the best of my understanding, any action by the human beings is a part and parcel of record, provided it reaches to the masses. Now, what material reaches to the masses? Who provide the material to the masses? How we reconstruct, I mean, just as a student of the history or archaeology, how we reconstruct the history? From where we got the information that the Jodha Bai's name was different, or some other personalities of our historical record. So it means that first we had to collect information, primary sources, primary data from the primary sources. Then only we can think. And now when some records have been collected, now comes the politics, religion and propaganda. Unless until we have any verified historical facts, it is very difficult to play as a tool for the religion or politics. Now we have number of records, say for example in Indian context. Now there is, because when we approach to the historical facts, whether literary or archaeological, we have something in our mind. We plan how to fix so many issues, whether that is a political issue of that time, social, religious. We make number of these structures, models to reach to the facts. But definitely everybody knows, as earlier the Plato or Aristotle called history and literature. Now we believe that there is some thin line between history and literature. As some of the speakers have already said, the history based on the facts. But who said that this is the fact? We have to verify from different sources, different contemporary sources. Then only we say this may be treated, or this literature may be treated as a historical literature. Now when we have some verified resources at our disposal. And then comes the word of this very seminar, revisit. It means earlier we have visited those archaeological facts or historical facts. Then what is the point of revisiting? Are we going to spread the propaganda, having something in our mind, maybe the politics or the religion? Because these are the two tools through which you can play with the masses. What most of the politicians are doing, not only in India, all over the world. Whether it is a Biden or the Trump. Now here comes the fact that as a neutral historian, our goal is very important, very significant. We don't have to be trapped by, sorry to say, by the fiction writers. Writing on the memories, unless until we definitely verify. Nowadays, a number of tools and techniques are available for the scientific verification of certain data, even the literature, even the paper. So we are, in comparison to earlier period, we are in better position to fix our historical facts. Now the major problem starts from rewriting history, reconstruction of the past, or revisiting the past. Now there is a very popular approach to history is, and most of us know about that, that is a Marxist approach to history. And that philosophy, philosophy is mainly based on, I think, two important pillars, haves and have. And that is on the basis of economics. Now this was the earlier tool to understand the past. Now this tool has been used a number of times in different formats. Now the latest turn for at least a decade now is a critical race especially by the American, especially the Marxist historians. They call themselves liberal, progressive liberal. Now there is another word they added to that, is a progressive liberal. Now they are writing this, an interesting point, I will come to that, how they are tracing the idea of this, not from America itself, but from Indian roots. Oldest literature of this land, that is Vedas. They are tracing the roots of this racial feeling from India. Definitely everybody knows there is a conflict between the black and white in America, right from the revolution, of the American Revolution. Now this critical racial theory said that they replaced rich and poor from white and black. And they said the black should woke up. And they should challenge all the arguments of the white. No, right? No problem. But they should challenge the individual, or they should challenge the identity of the group of the black or white. That is the issue. If I committed some crime, I should be punished, while all white people. Now comes another step, the further added one. And they said that there is an intersectionalism. Now I am black, so I am oppressed, and whites are oppressed. Okay? Now because I am black woman, therefore I am doubly oppressed. How this type of approach will help us in reconstructing or revisiting the history? That is my simple question for this audience. Now, in Indian context, they replace the word race with caste. Now, and rest model is the same. And how this philosophy or this approach reached to West or Europe or America is very interesting narration made by such scholars. That Vedic literature was read by the Britishers, and this knowledge, with this knowledge they reached to America. So roots of this racism of castes are from the Vedic literature. And they imposed colonialism, and because they are against white, so that they are colonizers. But the same principle they are not applying in Indian context. A number of individuals came here, made us colony, and they are not condemning themselves, the Britishers. They colonized us. So this type of approach, how far we will be able to really reconstruct or reach up to the truth of the past? Then comes another approach. Further extension of CR critical race theory is cancel theory. They said, if you are suggesting white, if I am saying something that goes against the black or oppressed, they are free to reject it. And then that points the word cancel. My way. So this type of the approach, and what they are really planning is to reach all the important offices of this continent or India. And this approach, as Prakash said, that this China and India economically and globally, to some extent, are at conflict. And this type of the approach in Europe and USA is totally supported by Chinese. But think that the Chinese is a communist country and they are not accepting this critical racial theory. They block them. They block the entry of such approach in China. They accepted capitalism, as most of us will know, and that's why it is one of the top rich country nowadays. They accepted capitalism, but under the control of Communist Party. They are not free. And they are providing funds to such people. So what is their interest is, and to some extent is the interest of the Western countries also, destroy the structure, social structure in our country. And for that, because what they say in the cancel theory is, reject their suggestions, revolt against that. if you study all the Marxist approach, they follow thesis of figures, thesis, antithesis, but never reach to the synthesis. They never reach to the synthesis. They will destroy and destruct all the structures. I mean, the social structure, and then they will come and rule us. But this is one of the interpretations made by not me, a number of scholars nowadays. And they are sending such trained person in the high offices because it has been mentioned by Rajiv Mehrotra and Vijay, something like that. They are co-author of a book, very famous book nowadays, very popular and debated book is Snakes
in the Ganga. Snakes in the Ganga.
They discuss all about this with suitable examples. And they mention, because they mention, therefore I am daring to give the name, and one person named Tarun Khanna is a member of Niti Aayog, and he is one of the champions of such approach. So like this, they are reaching the higher offices so that they can teach the second point, the politics of this country. Change the policies of this country. So this history is in making in India. Therefore, I thought that after seeing the title of this that instead of talking too much, why not evoke you against such evokeism? And remember that our CGI is also from the Harvard University. And the Harvard University and Berkeley and Oxford are champion in this. They are spreading this idea. So, I think I will love to discuss, if any, and once again, I am very grateful that the literary persons, I'm sitting with a literary person, I'm just providing, I mean, the historians are just providing material to them for right romantic. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sinha. Professor Sinha has boldly asked some very uncomfortable questions, and I'm very certain that these uncomfortable questions are going to create some interest here, and questions are already there in the minds of some people, I believe, because of these uncomfortable questions. But I'll begin with what he spoke of about thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So in this troubled times of political, ideological polarization, are we actually thinking of synthesis, one, and two, is synthesis at all possible? Is it or is it not? That could be a big question again. Or would people want synthesis? Would it be in their interest if synthesis happens? Would it be destructive, damaging to their politics on both sides of the divide? How many would want that synthesis to happen? Will it destroy, damage their industry and their interest or whatever? So, and also Professor Sinha spoke about the labeling of history, and he gave just one example, one kind of labeling. He said Marxist history, which is entirely based on the economic shape, character of a society, and then the Marxists, he says, do not. They have progressed in a way and call themselves progressive liberals, etc. So in this scenario where synthesis looks highly unlikely, is there any neutral history possible? This is a question which emerges from all that Professor Sinha has spoken about. And then when he began, he began by talking about what reaches the masses. Do masses matter? And I leave this question for you to think about. Do they really matter? Have they ever mattered? Even in the 19th century, when this kind of history was beginning to grow. Now moving to the next part. Does poetry, we are still in the domain of this, the cusp between history and literature. Does poetry tell history? Well, if someone asked this question, there would be a loud answer in chorus, and the answer would be yes, and there will be examples cited of poems like Iliad or Aeneid and the Mahabharata and Jayasi's Padmavat. So let's modify this question. And the modified question would be, does or can subjective, intensely personalized poetry does or can tell history? And the next question, if yes, if this kind of highly personal poetry can tell history, then what kind of history would that subjective, personal poetry tell? So we'll have some answers to these questions in what Professor Smita Agarwal has to say, with specific reference to Sylvia Plath. Of course, she'll be making other more references to Professor Agarwal.
Thank you, Prakash. I will not be giving you any answers. I'm just going to be raising some questions and wanting you to think about the questions that I raise. But before I begin, I need to, from the bottom of my heart, thank the newly appointed faculty of the Department of English, University of Allahabad, for giving me this last opportunity of grandstanding before I am consigned to the annals of history of this department. So thank you so much for having me here, and also thank you to the university and the Vice Chancellor and the entire university faculty and staff who have made this possible for us to be here. Made it possible for us to be here. So now to come to the topic of the panel discussion. Yesterday morning, we heard very deeply researched, well organized and well thought out presentations, lectures, talk, whatever you want to call them, by both Professor Harish Trivedi and Professor Makarand Baranchpe. But it was in the evening, in the unaupcharik and the informal conversation that Dr. Vivek Dwivedi and I were privy to, that, got me thinking and made me realize that, as Farooqi said just now, maybe biography and autobiography are the spaces where history and literature may come together comfortably. This is because we were hearing a lot, Vivek and I were hearing a lot about, Agye and his relationship with Kapila Vatsyayanji, and what somebody I've forgotten all those names since I'm not an expert in that area, what somebody in the world had written a biography like this, and somebody had written a biography like this in English. So then that's what made me think that perhaps this is the space where these two streams may blend together comfortably. Having said that, let me come to what I'm supposed to be talking about, and I'm going to be putting before you a case study. In a way, a case study regarding Sylvia Plath's two very iconic poems, Daddy and Lady Lazarus, that we teach in our undergraduate courses, that we study in our postgraduate courses. These two are famous, iconic poems of that young lady who committed suicide at the age of 32. Now, these poems give me, at least me, a wonderful insight into how the creative imagination may work with history. Both these poems, the bedrock of both these poems, the foundational idea of both these poems is the Nazi-Jew conflict. And this Nazi-Jew conflict she uses as a metaphor to talk about real people in her life in a deeply fictional manner. She talks about real people in her life like her daddy, like her husband, and the other male friends that she had. She talks about these real people. She uses them as a fictional resource. She creates caricatures of them. She distorts their personalities. She lashes out. She rants against these male characters. And in order to concretize her deeply felt angst, her deeply felt ideas of victimization and oppression, she uses the metaphor of the Nazi-Jew conflict. And the poems have such an immediacy in them that the uninitiated reader who is not going to do a PhD or write a paper on Sylvia Plath, the common reader will read the poems and go back thinking, rightly so, that she has suffered during the Nazi era in Europe, especially because she has the name Sylvia Plath and she has German ancestry. Her father was German, Otto Plath, her father was German, and they migrated from a very poor region of Poland called Posen. The Plath family migrated to America in the 1900s. The great-grandfather was an illiterate farmer who, along with a load of his relatives, came to America for economic reasons to make a better life for themselves. So they came from Posen in Poland to America. They were German. They lived there. And we see that as the family history unfolds, that there is this grandfather, great-grandfather who works at menial jobs, like, lugging sacks of grain from one truck to the ground, or from the ground to loading them onto the truck, and doing other odd jobs like a carpenter or a mason or whatever. From that, then there is not much known about the grandfather, but then we have Otto Platt, who is a Harvard professor, and then we have Sylvia Plath, who continues to hold the position of one of the most eminent poets that America has produced. So if the family has moved to the Americas in the 1900s, 3 generations ago, then how is Platt talking with such authority and with such immediacy about this whole Nazi Jew situation? And paradoxically, in the poem, the father is being, Otto Platt is being called a German, he's being called a vampire, he's being called Lucifer, he's being called Herr Doctor, whatnot. All sorts of names are being used for him. Eventually, she even calls him a bastard. She says, "Daddy, daddy, you bastard, I'm through with you." So there we have in these poems daddy slash her husband or slash any other male character who is an authority figure, who is totalitarian, who is torturing, victimizing, oppressing this poor soul. Okay, and written with great immediacy. So obviously then you start thinking, from where has she read history books and got all those details? There are specific concentration camps that are mentioned. A train, an engine carried me off to Dachau, to Auschwitz, to Belsen. Okay? So where has she got all these details from, when during the World War she herself is living in America? And then the other interesting fact is that Otto Platt in Daddy is called a Aryan, he's called a fascist, he's called a Nazi, but Otto Platt, the father, renounced his German citizenship in 1926 while living in America, he watched with horror the rise of Hitler. So this German identity has more or less been shed, and yet Platt is embracing it in order to vocalize her own psychological discomfiture. Okay. The other interesting thing that we then find out is, from where did Platt get all these details? And then we come to the Sautan, as they say in Platt's life, to the other woman in Platt's life, Assia Gutman, because of which Platt's marriage with Ted Hughes broke up, and because of which eventually led to Platt's suicide, because she was in such a phase of depression. It is, interestingly enough, it is Assia Gutman who has, on a first-hand basis, undergone the trials and the tribulations of Nazi oppression. Assia Gutman, who later became Assia Weevil, she was the daughter of a Russian Jew living in Berlin. Her father was a Russian Jew. He was a doctor. They were living in Berlin. The mother was a nurse. Then in the 1930s, all this fascism and all this Nazism began. And like so many other families living there at that time, the Gutmans also started fearing for themselves, for their future, for their lives. And Asya, as a child, is privy to the anxiety and the fear of her parents. Despite the mother being a German, they, like the other Jews living in Berlin at that time, they feel that it's about time that they looked at this issue with concentration and decided what they wanted to do with their lives if they wanted to survive. So a whole load of them, about 25,000 of them, one day in May 1933, boarded a train from Berlin to Switzerland and from Switzerland to Pisa, Italy, which had become a refugee center for Jews fleeing from Germany. Then they lived in Pisa, Look at me thinking of food. They lived in Pisa. They lived in Pisa for 2 or 3 years before they went off to Tel Aviv. Now, Asya visited, or rather she used to live with the Hughes in Devon during the period 1961 and 63. The Weevils had become friends with the Hughes, and Asya and her husband would come to the Hughes cottage in Devon, and they would be living together. And there were these coffee table talks between Asya and Sylvia Plath that happened. And Asya would narrate to Plath whatever her remembrance of that horrible time was. So Asya is the one who tells Plath about how they escaped from Berlin to Pisa, of how when they were on the train, of how when they were in Berlin, the Nazis would come and knock on their door and say insulting things and make crosses on the door and generally intimidate the Jews. And then on that eve when they were escaping on the train, Asya recalled or recounted to Plath how the Nazi boots walked all down the train carriages while they hid under the seat of the compartment. So this is a 6-year-old child, Asya, remembering that trauma. And in 1954, Asya revisited Pisa, and then she went back to Berlin, and in that trip she found out that her father's brother, who had stayed back in Germany, was killed by the Nazis, and the brother's wife was also murdered, and the brother's little baby was also murdered. So for Asya Gutman, it is a personal experience of terror and trauma that she is recounting to her supposed friend at that moment, Sylvia Plath. Okay. Yeah, I'm just finding out. She is recounting to Plath. And Plath, who has never, ever historically faced this situation, cannibalizes all this information, ingests all this information, and creates these literary pieces for us. So what I'm trying to say is that we may think upon this, of how historical facts may not belong to the individual per se. They may belong to anyone, they may come at you from anywhere, but it is the writer's imagination or the artist's creativity that twists and turns and distorts and blends and does whatever they feel like to create a piece of work that comes across to us as real, as history. And this can make us think of all the sources of history. After all, this is also a source of history. And how history may be fictionalized and how it may be vice versa. So I think this is what the panel discussion and what the seminar was asking us to cogitate upon and think upon. And I've been shown the slip. I had some more things to say, but I think I should say namaste and thank you to you all, and now shut myself up. Thank you.
It was, I had given a slip by the organizers, so I had to just pass on. I was just passing on to you. You were so lost in your speech that you didn't see how I was being instructed. But anyway, what I noticed here is a very interesting kind of cycle, sort of closing. Professor Neelum, Saran, Gour spoke about moments that we gather from works of creative writing, from literary pieces, and they are histories. Whether historians call them verified history or not verified history is a phrase that Professor Prakash Sinha was using. An interesting cycle that we didn't plan it, but it has happened so nicely. But then this last part, which I would like to talk about, not talk about, just sort of highlight or underline, that all that works of literature narrate, they somehow, they come to them through their experiences or through their readings. Now, when she was talking about the poems of Sylvia Plath, I was wondering how the likeness or the comparison can be taken to the computer technology, where you have on a page a hyperlink, and you click on that hyperlink, and then you move to the next page, more hyperlinks, and you move to next pages. This is how these beautiful poems work, as you explained. How many histories, personal, social, political, regional, geographical, racial, how many of them embedded in those poems? So that, in a way, an interesting way of revisiting history. What I find again interesting is that in some ways, Professor Smita Agarwal began by saying that she wouldn't be answering any questions, but she ended up answering a question that Professor Sinha had raised. Well, now I'll do something very nasty here. The nasty is that I had laid down the housekeeping rules of the format, and I'd said that we would open this panel for discussions. We will open. But there is a little problem. Professor Prakash Sinha has a conference as a seminar in his own department. So, if there are any questions, well, they should, I mean, in the audience, and Professor Neelum has to ask some questions, but all questions for Professor Sinha first, so that he can leave to join the seminar in his own department. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to use a number of problematic words. And the problematic word for Professor Sinha is fact. And he talks about facts being verified. I think back to the conclusive paragraph of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. He said, I have written this massive tome. And as I was finishing, there were sounds of a brawl out in the lane. People were, fighting, there were fisticuffs. And when I made inquiries, I got 6 different accounts. There were 6 different recountings of what had happened because it had all passed through a subjectivity filter. Everything is contoured by subjectivity. There is no empirical laboratory method for testing history unless you put everybody through a narco test. And we don't know how far that works. The only thing we count on is reportage and the authority of witnesses and how far there is a consensus. So what do we mean by objectivity? I think objectivity is only a consensus of several subjectivities. So that is my question about your definition of fact.
I think I never provided any definition for the fact. The fact is that this is the fact that I never provided any definition for the fact. Number one. Number two, what is fact? It is a subject. It depends upon from where we are getting or retrieving the information. What is its context? If it is verifiable by other context, the same thing, then we say this is nearer to the truth. But nearer to the truth, history is not truth.
Can I ask a question? No?
I'm getting constant instructions by the organizers.
We began late also.
You
I just have a small objection saying that, when you say that all revisiting is politically motivated, I want to, you said, I think yeah, so I felt that, it's doing a lot of injustice to the theme of the seminar and to many, many great writers and historians who are trying to speak from the subaltern point of view. And when you say that black women are oppressed and, oh, what nonsense is this, I take objection to that.
Okay. Now the question is that whether I said all revisiting is politically motivated. What? Oh, okay. No, definitely. When you are saying I am accepting, no problem. Because if you are revisiting some facts, it means you have some certain idea or motive behind that.
No, not facts. Just trying to discover more things around it.
So it means you know something before about that fact, right? You are either verifying or you are approaching the same with some different model or different approach. So the moment we are approaching it the same thing, having some other idea or interpretation that may be governed by the religion or politics, this may be the factor because human thinking is not isolated. Even if I am writing or anybody is writing based on certain so-called facts, is that he has some, because nobody is writing, even the literal person is not writing anything in vacuum.
Yes.
He has been brought up in certain socio-economic, psychological environment.
But even the courts of justice try to find out the whys and the hows. So revisiting is more about finding out the how and the why, not politically motivated.
No, I said it props up into our approach. Because if somebody has written something, following some model or some approach, if I am revisiting that with a different model, it means something is in our mind. And here comes the cognition, cognitive approaches to the history and cognitive approaches to the facts.
I have to apologize to the audience, but then I can't tell you how much of heat I'm feeling on my back constantly. And this is, I think, a very unpleasant duty for the moderator to do. So the situation is that Professor Neelum Gour is our Professor Neelum Gour, Professor Farooqi is our Professor Farooqi, and Professor Smita Agarwal is our Professor Smita Agarwal, and so is Professor Sinha. All of them are here. So I've been told that if audience, anyone among them, have any questions to ask them, they can ask them afterwards so that this session can be wound up. Thank you very much. And now I ask Dr. Kanchan to please take over.
Thank you, sir. It was such a wonderful session. We had the opportunity to have an understanding of the topic from 4 different perspectives. The views and ideas shared during this interaction have added various new dimensions for deliberation on the topic. Now, it's time for us to present the dignitaries with a token of appreciation. I request Dr. Amarnath Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of English and Modern European Languages, to present a memento to our esteemed guest, Professor Neelum Saran. I request Dr. Prashant Kumar Pandey, Assistant Professor, Department of English and MEL, to present a memento and kit to our esteemed guest, Professor Baran Farooqi. Prashant. Now, I request Dr. Umesh Chandra, Assistant Professor, Department of English and Modern European Languages, to present a memento and kit to our esteemed guest, Professor Prakash Sinha. Dr. Umesh. I request Dr. Aloysius Sebastian, Assistant Professor, Department of English and MEL, to present a memento and kit to our esteemed guest, Professor Smita Agarwal. Ma'am, but today we consider you as guest. Now, I request Dr. Prashant, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to propose formal vote of thanks.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by quoting Hegel, because as a student of Hegel, I have probably the moral right to do that. And he says, from history we learn that we do not learn from history. For me, since I come from the home of Romila and Bipan Chandra, so for me, history is an attempt to study the past in order to understand the present and also probably to shape the future. All other disciplines like literature, sociology, political science, they have their roles. But then in my opinion, they have limited roles. And our professional historians, they have the methods and through these methods they can even theorize these literatures. I would like to thank Professor Gour, Professor Agarwal, Professor Farooqi, Professor Sinha, Professor Prakash Joshi, and everyone else present in the hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant. Now it's time for the tea break. So I would like to request all the delegates and guests to move towards the tea counter. We will assemble here in 15 minutes for the next session. Thank you.
नहीं ये पोज नहीं होगा तो मुझे मना करो रिकॉर्डिंग पोज कर दो रिकॉर्डिंग बंद कर दो रिकॉर्डिंग बंद कर दो
कैमरा इज नॉट हियर
I wanted to introduce you to someone. She has been a student of the department. She has been Rani ma'am student. She has been my senior and a professor in Kanpur and Kolkata College.
Just now, both of them had so high, praise for you that you are doing so much for the university. Absolutely.
So this is a perfect presentation before all the type of IT input. It makes it a head and shoulder.
Is a perfectionist to the yes. That
We give him a job, we give him a responsibility. It is going to be done with perfection.
seamlessly.
And seamless.
Thank you for doing this. How it feels for me, like
so proud.
for me like एक मायका जो पेज उठ के मेरे मायके को आगे बढ़ा रहा है.
अच्छा ये आपका माइक
नहीं जिस यूनिवर्सिटी से आप पढ़े हैं, जिस डिपार्टमेंट से पढ़े हैं, उसकी जो न्यू जनरेशन है उसको और आगे ले जाए तो वी फील सो प्राउड कि देखो
नहीं जितने
all the new teachers they are all very good. In fact सब काम हम ही लोगों ने किया.
वही मैम अभी कहते हैं.
Okay, welcome back to day 2 of this national seminar on revisiting history through literature, religion, politics and propaganda. May I request you to take your seats, please? So we are going to start with the next session, and the topic is revisiting the political history of the Indian struggle for independence through political novels. We have two eminent experts for this session. May I welcome Professor Hitendra Patel. I would request Sakshi to escort Sir to the dais. At the same time, I welcome Professor Susheel Sharma. I'd request Apurvi to escort Sir to the dais. Thank you, sir. To felicitate the guests, I'd request Professor Manoj Kumar to present Professor Hiten with the bouquet. I'd request Anshu to help Professor Manoj. May I now request Dr. Amrish Khare, Assistant Professor, to present Professor Susheel Sharma with the bouquet of flowers. Damini, I request you to assist Amrish sir. Thank you, sir. We welcome you. It is a matter of privilege and honor to have with us this afternoon two luminaries, two excellencies, two erudites in their own respective fields. Surely this will be a journey of wonderful knowledge. The guest today, we have Professor Hitendra Patel. Sir teaches at Rabindra Bharti University, Kolkata in the Department of History. He has his doctorate from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, and Sir's range of interests center on the intellectual, social and political history of colonial and post-colonial India. He has worked
on the history of communal divide, Hindu nationalism, political mobilization during the Gandhian phase, peasant movements and leaders, representations of icons and events in literature. Also, he has special work on the First War of Indian Independence, 1857, other revolutionary movements and related themes. Professor Patel has also worked on Gandhi, Dalit history, Hindustanis of Calcutta, popular Hindi movies, socialist leaders, and the tribal history. His major publications include Communalism and the Intelligentsia in Bihar, 1870 to 1930, Khudiram Bose, Revolutionary Extraordinaire. The Hindi edition of this book is Khudiram Bose, एक अप्रतिम क्रांतिकारी। 1857 भारत का पहला मुक्ति संघर्ष। He has contributed to more than 50 research articles in Hindi, English and Bengali. Sir is also a Hindi novelist. 2 novels published, Harel and Chirkut, and an eminent literary critic. Recently, he has edited Shabd Karma Vimarsh, a literary magazine. And the list goes on and on. I mean, so it is great to have you here, sir. We have our chairperson, Professor Susheel Kumar Sharma, who is associated with Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Allahabad. Sir is one of the luminaries and top academicians in the country today. So it's a privilege and honor to have these 2 scholars with us on the dais today. Let's begin with this wonderful journey. Thank you, sir, once again, and I think the platform is all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amarnath. The guests have already been introduced. I'm deliberately using a plural, yes, despite the fact that I belong to the department. And I understand Professor Patel also belongs to the department in one way because he keeps on frequenting Allahabad quite often. And much of his work and his critical insights, despite the fact that he has been an alumnus of Jabalpur and JNU, the 2 universities that were in the limelight, perhaps for the wrong reasons, in the recent history. But here is a person who comes from 2 different disciplines and who balances both these disciplines. The literature, as has already been told, he has published 2 novels, and his basic training happens to be that of a historian. And we have been listening a great deal about this confluence of these 2 genres, 2 different subjects, 2 different disciplines, and the fuzzy borders that divide these 2 disciplines. So let us see how Professor Patel talks about and takes that. Please. I think 30 minutes or so. So kindly give him a big hand.
Chairperson sir, I can see Professor Harish Trivedi and many friends here, and I'm here to talk about my simple journey as a student of history to deal with modern Indian history themes like Indian national movement. I have been very uncomfortable with my kind of understanding of Indian national movement, and for many decades, at least I can trace back to the days when I was an undergraduate in Calcutta. I had been very uncomfortable with history, the way we had been taught, and I had a feeling that real history is somewhere else. We need a different kind of history. And the journey began when I read Maila Achal of Sharma. Thereafter, many books came, Adha Gaon came, Tamas came, and many other books came. And I found out that to have a better understanding of history, we need to move towards literature, and now I strongly feel that we need to use magazines also as possible sources to have a better understanding of a complex political history of India. I have been very vocal about this dissatisfaction because of my conviction that the kind of sources we have been using so far actually limit us to a particular kind of understanding in which the files dictate the terms in which we deal with past. And in that process, we find many gaps which are to be filled, and in fact those gaps provide us the opportunity to think differently. And I had a very painful experience of sharing my doubts, because no historian took me seriously when I wanted to write history through literature, until at the end of it, more than 2 decades struggle with my fellow friends of history, I found an opportunity to work on it at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, where Makarand Paranjpe understood what I tried to do, or trying to do, and thus I was able to work on Indian political history through literature. I'm aware that historians have also talked about the various kinds of histories which can be written very differently using different kind of sources. I can think of Eric Hobsbawm also, when he thought that history can be written on the basis of variety of sources. And this kind of dogmatism which has emerged and which had a powerful impact on Indian history writing till subaltern studies had somewhat opened it up in 1980s, there was a kind of hold of one kind of dogmatism cutting across the ideological lines. And that is where I think we can now in a better position to think about Indian national movement. To begin with, the Indian national movement can, if we start from 1857, there are a lot of writings available to us which actually tell us that the way Indian historians have understood 1857 needs to be qualified, that the understanding needs to be qualified. That is very, I'm not going into that. What I will be focusing on is the story which is known to us, the story of Indian national movement, which we thought as a student of history began really under Indian National Congress, particularly when Gandhi took the leadership. So the story has been told in such a way that there was some kind of movement going on before Gandhi, but actually after coming of Gandhi, the real story or real kind of national movement began. But I tell you, this is an understanding which needs to be qualified, and that requires a different kind of understanding of what really the struggle was for. Gandhi came to India in 1915 as a leader, But before he came to India, he was given this status by some forces, some people of great eminence in India. And I think there is a politics behind it. A lot of people were talking about his great achievements in South Africa and his struggle, and the status of Mahatma was given to him before he actually took over the leadership. And I think there is a politics behind that. Then he took his time. He said few things which actually was not in circulation. He said some radical things. Many people would remember his intervention in Banaras when he came and he gave a speech which was radically different from the speeches Indian leaders had been giving there. Annie Besant felt very uncomfortable. She left the hall and many other things had happened. But what I am trying to underline is that Gandhi's coming to Indian politics needs to be understood very carefully. Why he was given that kind of a status in India by some people like Gokhale, Shraddhananda, Rabindra Tagore and others. This is a question which I am not going to answer today because that requires at least 10-15 minutes time and I do not have that much time. But I think there was a politics behind that. After Gandhi came, he did not become the leader. He became leader in between December 19 and December 20. And that process has to be probed how Gandhi could become the leader. And I think there is a process which has not been examined properly by historians, except those historians who actually wanted to see Gandhi in such a way as if he was a person who was supported by certain forces in India, and it was basically to belittle Gandhi phenomena. I can think of some historians like Judith Brown and others who wanted to see him as someone who was supported by a class of people. I do not dismiss that theory, that kind of understanding, but still I believe that that is only a very limited view, a negative exercise to understand Gandhi. What I am actually trying to draw your attention to is that in between 1919 and 1920 December, these two Decembers are very important. In 1 year's time, Gandhi's rise to power had something to do with a different kind of political environment which had been created in India. And this Khilafat movement, which is still not very clearly understood by students of history, why Khilafat movement became such a big force and how could it become possible for Gandhi to bring Hindus and Muslims together on an issue which was not properly understood by Congress and its followers. And I'll give you a striking example to underline the fact that Khilafat movement history has not been adequately explained to the students of history. That would be a dramatic kind of example, but I'll come to little later. The politics of Gandhi made some people very uncomfortable. And though among those people were people like Shraddhanand, Malaviya and Annie Besant, and more importantly Jinnah, Tilak, all these people became very uncomfortable. But their reasons for being uncomfortable are to be understood. We keep blaming Muhammad Ali Jinnah for various things. We keep blaming him. But if we read about his attempts to make Gandhi understand that the kind of forces he was relying on, these forces are not going to stay with him for long. Once the religious fervor would not be around, these people would go away. And he wrote those letters to Gandhi to explain to him that this mob is not going to remain with you. And here, I would say that Shraddhanand also needs to be given proper attention. Many people, many students should know that when Gandhi came to India, the two people who actually he relied most on, among the three people, I mean, Gokhale was very much there. Among other two people, he was relying on Shraddhanand and Tagore. And Shraddhanand supported him. And very significant support came from Shraddhanand at a time when Gandhi was new to politics. But Shraddhanand had also some reservations about Khilafat movement. And Malvi also had some reservations. We have been very unjust to Shraddhanand and Malviya when we deal with this 1 year's crucial period. I have had the details of how in this 1 year time, Gandhi was able to become the leader of India at the organizational level at least because of two reasons. One was his radicalism and his promise that he is fighting for the independence and he would liberate India. He had promised that he would liberate India in 1 year's time, which no leader was courageous enough to promise to the people. And other was the significant presence of very vocal Muslim presence in Congress meetings. If you go into the details of how this mob created such pressure on Tilak, Chittaranjan Das and other leaders, you will find that this vocal presence of Muslim leaders, I mean Muslim powerful contingent, had a powerful impact at that time. And that impact actually tilted Motilal Nehru, who was skeptical about Gandhi's political program, towards Gandhi. And in this 1 year time, which has not been adequately addressed by historians, at least in the textbook level, it does not come down to those details where actually we can understand why Gandhi became so important. We always refer to Champaran, we always refer to his appeal to people because he started looking like common people, he started wearing clothes and all kind of symbolism got involved in it. He was speaking in Hindi and he was able to make certain connections with people in a very different way. Those things are talked about. But the real political struggle which was going on, that is not communicated to the people who really should be informed that Gandhi became powerful because of certain kind of manipulation which actually had been going on during this 1 year time. If you deal with political history of that time, you will find that on many points, Malvi was frustrated, Tilak was getting frustrated, Lala Lajpat Rai was getting frustrated, and most frustrated was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Why these people were frustrated? In Besant we can also refer to. These people had fought for Indian national cause for more than 10-15 years. And most dramatic example would be of Jinnah. Jinnah was associated with Congress as a person who was trying to work among the Muslims to keep them with Congress. And he was in certain way a kind of person who was actually close to Congress. And one should not forget one example which many of you may not be aware of. He was holding a meeting in Bombay where Muslim League was organizing an annual conference. Usually what happened, Congress organizational meetings were followed by Hindu Mahasabha meetings and Muslim League meetings also. So those meetings were something in which Congress, Muslim League and Hindu Mahasabha people collectively thought of Indian cause. And in one of those meetings of Muslim League in Mumbai, Muslims boycotted Jinnah, and a powerful leader of Muslims in Mumbai, he actually tried to prevent Jinnah. I'm forgetting the year, maybe 17 or 18. They tried to prevent Jinnah. He was unable to hold the meeting, and the charges which were leveled against Jinnah was that how can he represent Muslims? He is not Muslim. He is the agent of Hindus. He is the agent of Congress. He is not our man. He is not our man. So ultimately Jinnah had to rely on his contacts, and he was helped by English. The proceedings were done in private, mainly in English. The people who were trying to prevent the meeting, tried to make everything possible. Even they were entering into the hall and shouting against Jinnah. They wanted the meeting to stop there. But because everything was done in English, most of them did not understand. In fact, all of them did not understand. And when the news was reported in Urdu next day, then they came to know that these people were speaking very dangerous things. And thereafter, Jinnah was abused like anything. So this is the situation. So Jinnah was not actually, at that time, the person who was representing the fundamentalist section of the Muslims. Now I come to Amritsar session, where actually this transfer of political power actually happened, 1919 December. At that time, Gandhi was offered the leadership, and Gandhi was hesitant. He wanted the approval of two people, Malviya and, surprisingly, Jinnah. Unless Jinnah said, without Jinnah saying to him that yes, you take over the power, you take the leadership, he was not willing to accept the leadership. So on that occasion, Jinnah referred to him as Mahatma, and then Gandhi took the leadership. This is very interesting. Now, what were the objections which were there raised by those leaders who actually belonged to an earlier era, Tilak era? Those objections were that the Muslims are coming with Hindus under Congress, with Congress, but they are not giving enough evidences to suggest that they will remain with Congress after the religious cause is over or religious demands are met. These are the objections. These are the objections raised by all the leaders, including Shraddhanand and Malviya and others. And what happened? What actually happened, I am afraid to say that those reservations were justified in some ways. What actually happened, you will be noticing that once the Khilafat movement's fervor is gone down, riots began in India. Why these riots began? And that has to be analyzed. All these stories were not actually coming to my mind, or I was not thinking along those lines, because I thought that what historians have told us should be correct. We should accept those things. But in one of the novels, I found one character saying that, have you heard Muhammad Ali? He is a Pakka communal man. Pakka communal man. Have you heard the presidential speech of Muhammad Ali? So I thought of one question, that what actually Muhammad Ali had said in that speech, which actually makes this character speak that, have you heard that he is a Pakka Islamist or something of that sort. That kind of observation was there. I looked for the sources, and as a historian, student of history, I looked for all possible sources, including the collected works or selected works of Muhammad Ali, and that was edited by one of the most respected historians of India. So I thought that that should be reliable. But in that speech, which was there in the collected works, I did not find any mention of anything which can say that Muhammad Ali had made any observation on the basis of which he could be called a communal man. Obviously the problem begins with me. I looked for other sources and finally I came across the original draft of that speech, in which he had talked about one kind of division of depressed classes, conversion of depressed classes should be allowed for the Islamic organizations. So Islam, these depressed classes could be converted, and this kind of observation actually, obviously it made some impact on Hindu Congress leaders, and they became very, very vocal against Jinnah, and they started putting pressure on Gandhi. I thought of that time, why these 3 paragraphs have been omitted? Why this was hidden even in the text where it should be absolutely necessary for the editor to keep those passages in that text. It was not done. And I think 3 dots started the doubt in my mind. And then I searched for different kind of novels, political novels, which actually dealt with the period which is called Gandhian period, sir. And to avoid various kinds of allegations, I thought of representing 4 major writers who systematically wrote about the political history of India from 4 ideological vantage points. One was communist Yashpal, other was somewhat near to Congress Amritlal Nagar, another person was Bhagwati Chand Verma, and much to the dislike of many friends, I also took Guru Deptt, who was a Hindu nationalist person who was influenced by Hindu nationalist frame. Just wanted to tell the story from 4 angles. And in those stories, I found a lot of materials which could have been possible sources for Indian historians, but those sources have never been touched upon or referred to, or in fact, they were not dealt with. Why this happened? And I think in this short time which is given to me, I can think of 4 or 5 phases about which historians are silent, or at least they have not adequately addressed those periods' history in a comprehensive manner. First, rise of Gandhi. Second, Khilafat movement and its aftermath. Riots started, and large number of writings are available now. Then third is how Gandhi was criticized by young leadership which was emerging in late 20s. And in that kind of a challenge, you will find 2 very prominent voices. One was Subhash Chandra Bose and other was Jawaharlal. There was a very difficult phase in late 20s where these new young leadership was emerging. And you know, you can connect it with Jayaprakash Narayan and other people when the socialist movement emerged, and 34 onwards, socialists also, Narendra Dev and other people joined in. Lohia came a little later, but there were other people. That story has to be retold. And on that also I found large number of references in the novels I am referring to, in the writings of these novelists who actually referred to that. Now in 30s, late 30s, the 3rd and 4th significant phase, when Subhash Chandra Bose emerged. How Subhash Chandra Bose was able to challenge Gandhi without being disrespectful to him is a story which has to be told. And it has to be connected with the history of revolutionary movement, and more importantly the reservations which had been there since the days of M.N. Roy's criticism of Gandhi's method in his very important text, India in Transition, which was published in 1922. If I read out the passages from that text, you will find that M.N. Roy had made some observations which turned out to be very, very prophetic. He did say that Gandhi carried within him two kinds of contradictory forces. At one point, he is a revolutionary, but he is also carrying the forces of reactions. And that, though in this struggle, he will perish. He will be finished. This is saying, M.N. Roy is saying 1922. He is saying something which needs to be seen why and how he could be able to make some kind of observations like that. Now, obviously this makes us very uncomfortable. Actually, Chittaranjan Das, but Gandhi comes into the frame because Chittaranjan Das and Gandhi came together in that critical phase of 1 year time in which Gandhi becomes very powerful. And that is why this whole history gets connected. Now, Avani Mukherjee, M.N. Roy, these were skeptical, they were planning for something else, and they were very critical about C.R. Das. And this is where history goes into a different direction. Now Gandhi becomes the leader, and he is seen as the leader of India, and this new leadership which was taking over the power, this is the group which actually took the power after 1947. This is important. All the old leadership were now gone. And this new leadership under Gandhi actually took the political power in Congress, and these are the people who actually got the power after 1947. And this is, I am not saying this. This is very, very difficult, sir, to think of as some kind of a proposition or some kind of hypothesis which could be taken seriously. But these novels actually explain to us how these things can also be thought of. And that is where I think this is one kind of opening for us to go towards some uncomfortable materials to give us a different kind of understanding of how things actually developed. And then, and perhaps most misunderstood, two very significant phases, and that is Quit India movement, which actually dramatically changed the political composition, political situation in a different way. Gandhi is no longer the real power, real person who could actually take the command of Indian politics after 8th of August 1942. Why did it happen? Gandhi became somewhat a marginal figure, although symbolically he remained powerful because nobody else had that kind of power among the people. That is very much there. But in real sense, if you see the process and try to read why Gandhi is so uncomfortable after 1942, he is reaching out to Jinnah through Rajgopalachari, through Bhulabhai Desai, and Gandhi is trying to make a position in this kind of political context in which he was sidelined. Gandhi's sidelining in the politics of India is something we are very, very uncomfortable with. In that kind of a narrative where Dedi hame azadi bina khadak bina dhal, this kind of positioning or this kind of looking into the materials which actually tell us why Gandhi was so marginalized makes us really very uncomfortable. Now I bring in Nirmal Kumar Bose, who had warned Gandhi in early 30s. He wrote some letters to Gandhi and said to him that, look, you are a great man, you have a different kind of a project, but the people who are representing you or associates of you are not understanding you properly. They are not with your project. They are with their own project, and once that is over, can I take 2-3 minutes? Oh, sorry. So Gandhi will not remain powerful if the forces which were sustaining his movement or helping his movement would find him uncomfortable. And he wrote in categorical terms that these people will put you aside once their objectives are fulfilled. I get some kind of a connection of what reservations, what kind of observations M.N. Roy had made in 1922 and what kind of apprehensions Nirmal Kumar Bose had in early 1930s. So Gandhi himself was unable to understand or comprehend the complexities which were emerging in India after 39. And you will find that in 1942, which is the period in which he actually took a decision which surprised many, because Subhash Chandra Bose and Gandhi were struggling over one very critical issue. Should we make use of this situation of launching an attack against the British power, or should we wait? Subhash Chandra Bose wanted the movement to intensify when they were very uncomfortable in 1939, and he had some idea that World War will start. So he was right in certain ways to take this position as an advantageous position to strike the opponent at a time when they were most vulnerable. But Gandhi took this decision of starting the movement in 1942. By that time, more or less it was clear that Japan and Germany are not going to win the war. But in 1939, it was not very clear. In fact, there are records which suggest that Congress, there was some kind of difference of opinion about who actually will win the war. And here again, another novelist, Yashpal, helps us a lot. Meri Teri Uski Baat is a novel which needs to be read very carefully. Here, M.N. Roy is a significant presence, and M.N. Roy's people are given much space in Yashpal's this very important novel, which he wrote in 1970s, but it was in making for quite some time. Meri Teri Uski Baat, it was published 74, if I am not wrong, or in 70s, for which he was given Sahitya Academy Award. But last but not the least, how India became independent. That process, 1945 onwards, 1946 onwards, there was a process which needs to be probed further. You will find that Indian leaders stopped writing after 1940s. Why? Most of the people wrote till 42, 43, 44, but not beyond that. Why? This is because this is a situation nobody had actually comprehended. They did not think that the forces which we are generating will go out of our hands. And that Jinnah, who had warned Gandhi in 1920, there are letters which are not available in India. I got the copies of those letters from a very old book which was published in 1945 from Karachi, and in those letters he categorically warned Gandhi that this mob force is not dependable force. Please do not rely on them. Politically, Jinnah was correct. And when this mob force switched from this side to that side, switched over, then everything went out of the Gandhi's hand. And this kind of vulnerability of Gandhi is something which historians need to explain to the people, why Gandhi is in such a desperate position after Muslim League proved that Muslims of India, at least those people who could vote, were with the idea of Pakistan in 1945 election. And this is where I think we need to be very carefully look into the materials which are there in novels. Jhootha Sach is a novel, very big novel, Professor Harish Trivedi has been associated with his translation and he's written a very remarkable foreword. This is not that dawn. Yeh hua subah nahi. And in that book, certain very uncomfortable zones are dealt with. Please remember that Yashpal is one person who had seen the revolutionary days of 20s, his disillusionment with revolutionary movement, his familiarity with the socialist options, and the troubles which were going on inside the Congress, and in 40s the various kind of possibilities. He was familiar with that. And then he writes Jhootha Sach in two parts. And many people say that in the first part he was somewhat communist, but in the second part he became pink. But there are reasons to believe that he was sincerely trying to make a point which made people uncomfortable. So much so, he became so critical of Nehru at that time that he was denied Sahitya Academy because of his anti-Nehru stand. And this is something which is not true, many people believe, because Bhagwati Jan Verma has written, who was the beneficiary of this, he wrote that I got it because of Dinkar's reservations and many other things are written. I am not saying that all these are correct, but I am suggesting that there were some kind of reservations about the views he expressed against Nehru. Riots started, riots detailing, and in which some points are there which Yashpal has also raised, in which he said that if the political leadership had been very clear about the plans, about partition, how this should be done, then there should not have been that much bloodshed. He was saying in his book that we are being forced out of our watan to our desh, which has been created by politicians. For this bloodshed, the people who have decided to draw the line are to be blamed. This kind of understanding can be found in the novels, in various kinds of writings, in which the confusion of the people can be understood, can at least be explained, can be put on the table. But in history writings, these kind of confusions are not expressed. Why this is so? This is a question that can be answered only by going into the details of how Indian historians actually have dealt with the transfer of power. Why the historians of India had been so soft on critiquing the Congress leadership, which actually had many problems, genuine problems, not intentional always. We cannot doubt about the intentions of greats like Gandhi, Nehru or any other great leader, Sardar Patel. But the thing is that politics was moving in a direction in which these kind of ideas which they actually followed could come across a kind of situation which was difficult for them to make sense of. And that is where I think these new questions and these kind of confusions must be addressed. Subhash Chandra Bose, partition riots, and thereafter how a new kind of establishment emerged after independence, which was content-wise the continuation of the elites of colonial period. And here I am again helped by Hobsbawm, who says that the people who actually came to power with the new establishment came from the families, he said 100 families, they came from those families which were the beneficiaries of colonial period system. This is observed by Hobsbawm, much to my surprise, but actually I could make sense of it once I read Bhagwati Chand Verma's Prashn or Marichika. Prashn or Marichika. He wrote another book, Bhule Bisrachit, and then Prashn or Marichika. These are the books which actually gave us, at least in his own way, with his own limitations, he had certain other kind of biases, it could be possible. But still, he tells us the story of, and at least he raises some questions which actually make us rethink about these positions and these historical situations. I will wind up by saying that one person, Guru Dutt, was not a very great historian or great writer at all. But he did raise some questions. He described certain situations which need to be seen and understood. So I am suggesting here that through my own experiences that these novels should be read very, very carefully to find out some materials which actually can be worked on to understand why Indian political leadership was in such a situation where they were unable to, they were neither able to counter the forces which got generated, nor they could provide the solution. They just waited and watched. And millions of people suffered because of this utter confusion of leadership. And this is where I think the literateurs, at least the political novelists, have something to offer. I deliberately avoided referring to the political writings which appeared in the magazines, starting from Malaviya, Krishnakant Malviya of Maryada days. I deliberately avoided talking about references from Madhuri, references from Chand and many other journals. I deliberately avoided referring to Yashpal's edited Biplabi. I am not going into that. Even the political novels I am referring to, those novels which actually give us a very systematic, at least periodically, one novel ends in 1920, another it takes up the story from 1920 to 36, 36 to 42, 42 to 49. Like this, they have provided us various kinds of perspectives. We may not take those as facts, but at least they can give us a kind of understanding of the expected from historical. Are proving difficult zones for historians these days. I am not saying that what literatures wrote was history, but what I am suggesting is that if we see the history of the national movement through the literature, we may open up the spaces for more dialogue, more discussion, and more questions about the complex subject such as political history of India, which needs multi-layered examinations of multi-layered political processes. It must not be dismissed, or it must not be left to only the historians whose biases we can talk about some other day. I can think of Namvar Singh, who actually, you must be aware of his name, great man. Some of the key ideas, many would be surprised to know that some of the key ideas I have picked up from Namvar Singh's different writings as well. So my story is not at all going with certain kind of forces, revisiting exercise at all. These are the sincere attempts, some kind of a naive, you can call, but some kind of a sincere attempt to raise those uncomfortable questions about a period which actually need to be examined and re-examined by all of us, because the burden of that history is on us. We are in a very difficult situation because we have not learned the lessons from the history of that period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patel sir, for sticking to the time schedule that was given to you. I do not know if the organizers want the session to be open for questions, but certainly there will be some time for me to talk about this lecture. So, in order to summarize whatever Professor Patel was saying, he was simply trying to justify the existence of the literature department in a time when humanities are at the stake and humanities are under constant attack. So trying to justify what literature can do in order to understand not only the present contemporary times but also the past. That was the main focus, and he was trying to understand the gaps that could be filled through their reading of literature, the gaps that are there that have been created by the historians, and the narrations that are available in the history. They give you the impression that there are no gaps or unimportant things are there, they simply talk about main events. So he started talking about the novel. So he started talking about the complex political history of the contemporary times, and as a matter of fact, the evaluation of the contemporary times happens to be the most difficult thing, because you are not able to understand as to who is on which side, and by the time you try to understand this or you are able to understand this, the time is already over, the harm or the benefit has already been claimed by the person. Then the role of small magazines, which he did not elaborate upon because of the lack of time, obviously, and he referred to, in the partition fiction, he did not simply concentrate on the Delhi-based authors. As a matter of fact, I was telling my students the other day that in this country there are two kinds of authors. One that get published by the multinationals, and another that get published by local authors. And the concerns of both these class of authors, they are entirely different. Therein comes the role of the small magazines and the small time presses. He referred to Gour, and he also referred to the objections that his friends in the academia had for the inclusion of Gour. He perhaps deliberately missed out Savarkar. Savarkar has also written novels. Mopla, for example. The issues referred to in Mopla have been talked about, communal rights. But where is the Hindu point of view? In all the fiction, partition fiction particularly, what kind of discourses are there? The discourses are that Hindus and Muslims, they were living in unity, and suddenly this communal problem cropped up because of the Britishers. Now the Britishers came in this country in early 19th century. This problem was not created by them all of a sudden. Why suddenly 1942 onwards these communal rights start taking place? Now in 2023, the Britishers are not there. Can Hindu Muslims unite? Can we talk in terms of Akhand Bharat? As a matter of fact, the people who talk of Akhand Bharat, they are described as the most communalist people in this country. The people who are talking of the Hindu-Muslim unity, they are being described like that. And we continue to blame the Britishers for the divide between Hindus and Muslims. So why are we not trying to understand the problem between the Hindus and Muslims, the core issue of the partition and the core issue of partition fiction? He referred to Swami Shraddhanand. He also referred to Tagore. Actually, both these persons are credited to give that name Mahatma, that prefix to Gandhi. And what was Shraddhanand doing? Shraddhanand, as a matter of fact, was talking of what you call in present day terms Ghar Wapsi. And Gandhi, what was Gandhi's take on conversion? Gandhi was saying that everybody is free to choose his or her own religion, so much so that Gandhi's own son converted to Muslim. Was it a voluntary action on behalf of Gandhi's son, or was it a resentment against Gandhi? That issue also needs to be understood properly. He also referred to Jinnah. There was a section of Muslims who were saying that Jinnah was not a Muslim. As a matter of fact, that charge was not only against Jinnah, that charge was also against Sir Sayyid. Sir Sayyid, even in a letter that has been written to Malala, the so-called Talibanis, they have referred to Sir Sayyid. They say he was a Unitarian. And Unitarians were not considered to be Muslims by the core Muslims, the Talibanis. So the charge was not only against Jinnah, the charge was also against Sir Sayyid. But the matter of fact that Sir Sayyid and his followers continued to stay in India while Jinnah migrated. I raised in one of the seminars a question when Gandhi was saying that Hindus and Muslims, they could stay in their own lands. And there were a large class of migration from one side to another side. Is there any record of any Hindus migrating from India to Pakistan? Or any Muslims migrating from Pakistan to India? As a matter of fact, he referred to the election of 1945. This election of 1945 was considered to be an election on the basis, as a matter of fact, a mandate for partition. Naturally, the discourse before 1945 election, the discourse after 1945, that is a very a great phenomena to be understood in the proper light. And I try to understand that. As to how was it that Congress leadership that stood for the unification lost that election. It was only in the frontier areas of Pakistan that Congress could withstand its position. That too because of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the frontier Gandhi. Otherwise, they lost the election. One of the answers I found was in Rajendra Prasad's book, where he says that the Congress leadership was arrested. They could not do the type of campaigning that was required to be done. The second issue was the issue of electorate, particularly the young audience who are used to this universal franchise. They should know this fact that the universal franchise was not given in 1945 election. Only 3 types of persons were allowed to vote. Those who had a particular type of qualification, those who had particular tax, and those who had a particular type of landholding. Am I right, sir? And all these people, meaning thereby the high class people, they were siding with Muslim League. And they were seeing the promotions in the government job, they were trying to find out new opportunities, the new fine land, and therefore this result against Congress in those particular areas. Now this is not my take, this is what I understood from Rajendra Prasad's book. He also referred to Gandhi. Gandhi kyon mare? Yes. There is a small incident that I would like to recite from my own family history, because personal histories also matter. My father used to go to an Urdu school when Gandhi's news reached his village, and the school was closed. So his mother, that means my grandmother, asked him why had he returned early that day. So my father said, Gandhiji has died. He has been killed. So there used to be only one teacher in that school. His name was Sibte-Razi. My grandmother's response was, Gandhi kyo mare? Mare Sibte-Razi? The kind of affection people had for Gandhi. Gandhi kyo mare? This news that reached the village after almost a week of Gandhi's death. Because in those days, these means of communication were very scarce, and everybody did not have radio, transistor, this WhatsApp, etc. did not exist in those days. There is one more issue that one has to think about, and that also shows the relevance of English departments, not only in this country but elsewhere. You simply look at the educational background of all these people that were referred to. In India, as we get the history, people came on coming, karma aata gaya, Hindustan banta gaya. कभी कभी ऐसा लगता है कि क्या ये सराय थी क्या? कारवां आते गए, हिंदुस्तान बनता गया. But that is the kind of history that we get. Anyway, कभी क्या उन कारवाओं के खिलाफ कभी किसी ने आज़ादी की आवाज़ उठाई? वो कई कारवां ऐसे थे जिन्होंने इस देश को लूटा और फिर यहाँ के मालिक बन गए. क्या कभी कोई आवाज़ उठाई, या कभी आवाज़ उठाई तो क्या वो आवाज़ सक्सेसफुल थी? How was it that the only successful movement was against the Britishers? I very much doubt if there were some attempts, sustained attempts to throw out all these caravans from Hindustan. और ये सारे लोग कहाँ के पढ़े हुए थे? Be it Gandhi, be it Jinnah, be it Subhash Bose, be it C.R. Das, be it Tilak, all of them had been the products of British universities. Naturally, there is something in this education, and generally people say the love of liberty that India has imbibed is not indigenous to India, because Indian philosophy does not talk about the concept of liberty as a community. We talk in terms of liberating the selves. We do not talk in terms of liberating the countries or the societies. So, he also referred to the debate between Gandhi and Nehru. Yashpal, he particularly referred to, Yashpal sided with Nehru. But there was one more charge against Yashpal. We sitting in Allahabad, Prayagraj, not very far away from this park, Chandrasekhar Azad Park. The encounter of Chandrasekhar Azad took place in that park, and for a great deal of time, people were raising fingers against Yashpal. They were saying that he was the person who gave a tip to the Britishers. So much so, and this man Yashpal was so much annoyed by this charge that when Hemwati Nandan Bahuguna, who had been a product of this very university, was the chief minister, Yashpal wrote to him saying that if there is anything in the British files against me, kindly tell me. Otherwise, put the truth before the people that I was not responsible. So it was not simply the debate between Nehru and Gandhi After all, Bhavani Bhattacharya or even this Raja Rao, all of them, most of the intellectuals of the day, ultimately they sided with Nehru and they did not side with Gandhi. After all, Gandhi, as a matter of fact, has been the greatest moral leader ever produced in this country.